As kids, my friends and I loved sleepovers. The excitement of staying up late, sharing ghost stories, and indulging in snacks made those nights unforgettable. However, one particular sleepover would forever be etched in my memory as a night of sheer terror and the chilly encounter with a stranger. It was a crisp autumn evening when I found myself at my friend's house, Michelle's. Her parents were away, leaving us with the freedom to enjoy our party without any adult supervision. The house was nestled in a quiet neighborhood, surrounded by tall trees. As the night descended upon us, we retreated to her bedroom, armed with blankets and a trove of food. The room was cozy, the faint glow of a nightlight casting shadows on the walls. We giggled and chatted, completely oblivious to the horrors that awaited us outside of the house. It was during a lull in our conversation that we heard a noise, a soft scraping sound. We traded anxious glances, our laughter fading into nervous silence. As if in response, a faint tap echoed from the window. With a knot on my stomach, I turned my head towards the source of the sound, my eyes widening in disbelief. A figure stood outside, their face obscured by the darkness. Fear constricted my throat as I noticed the glint of eyes peering in at us, fixated on our vulnerability. Heart pounding, I mustered the courage to approach the window, my trembling hand slowly pulling back the curtain. What I saw froze me. A man, his face twisted in an unsettling smile, stared back at us. His eyes were vacant, as if devoid of any humanity, and his voice carried a sinister tone as he whispered, "Open the door." I recoiled, instinctively taking a step back. Panic seized me as I realized the danger that we were in. With my voice quivering, I whispered to my friends, urging them to stay silent and to keep away from the window. We huddled together, clutching each other tightly, paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. The man persisted, though, his voice growing more insistent. "Let me in, I just want to talk," he pleaded, his words dripping with malice. His presence was suffocating, invading the sanctuary of our sleepover. Time seemed to stretch as we waited in silence, praying for the man to leave. Minutes turned into forever, as his relentless pleas echoed outside of the window. But then as suddenly as he had appeared, the man turned and vanished into the night, his voice fading into a haunting memory. We remained frozen in fear, scarcely daring to breathe. It took us a while to gather the courage to peek outside, ensuring that the man was truly gone. Once we felt that it was safe, we mustered the strength to call the police, recounting the horrifying encounter with trembling voices. Though the stranger was never identified or found, his intrusion left an indelible mark on our innocent minds. The sleepovers that had once been filled with laughter and camaraderie were now tainted with the lingering fear of the unknown. Our sense of security had been shattered. We learned that danger could lurk around every corner, even amidst the innocence of childhood. For background, my family moved to the countryside from the city when I was about 7 years old, and I'm 21 now. Both my parents had grown up in the suburbs and had lived in the capital of our state for about 10 years before we had moved. It definitely took us some time to get used to the train tracks that ran by our house, the wild animals, the weird but kind neighbors, and the odd visitors. Another thing is that you have to get off the main road and turn onto a long gravel drive to get up to our house. We can see the entire length of the driveway from certain points in our yard, which is about 3 acres. A few years after we had moved in, my dad got a promotion at work, and as a result, started to go to conferences and business trips that lasted from a few days to a week, at least a couple of times a year. My mom felt nervous about being home alone with 2 young kids, I was 10 and my brother was 6, and so we decided to get a dog. We knew that we wanted a big dog, but something that would be gentle with my brother and I. After a few weeks looking at shelters, we took home Rocky. He was about 9 months when we took him home, and dirty pushing 70 pounds. We believed that he was a German Shepherd mix with some northern or mountain breed. We aren't sure to this day, but he's a massive red-colored dog with a long black muzzle and ears, a fluffy tail that he carries over his back, and a white stripe up his nose. It wasn't long until he was 100 pounds, and an absolute force to be reckoned with. Even though he was very gentle with both my sister and I, loved our cats and was a big ball of joy around everyone we brought into our house, he tended to be very territorial and aggressive with other dogs, and very protective of us, especially of my mom and I. Once the electric company came to do work on the telephone poles on our property without telling us at first, and after 20 minutes they finally had to call us because Rocky had trapped them in their truck and was jumping up and barking at their windows. I doubt he would have really attacked them if they had gotten out of their trucks, but it was more than enough to make them think twice. This protective instinct came in very, very handy one day. It was summertime and my dad was at work and my mom was home with my brother and I, since she was a teacher and off for the summer with us. My mom was working in our garden, and my brother and I were playing close by, with Rocky watching over all of us. Rocky all of a sudden sounded the alarm, throwing his head up in the air and barking and howling. He makes a deep woo-woo noise. I looked up to see a dirty white pickup truck pull off from the main road and into our driveway. This wasn't necessarily alarming at first, as people sometimes used our driveway to turn around when they got lost. But the white pickup slowly ambled up our drive, and I could see something strange in the bed. It was lumpy and discolored, but I couldn't really tell what it was until he pulled all the way up to our house, where our other cars were, and honked the horn to get our attention. It was meat. Giant red chunks of meat with some of the limbs of various animals still attached. It was the creepiest thing that I had ever seen in my life. Just a grizzled, scraggly man in his early 50s, driving a pickup truck full of meat in the southern July heat. I immediately just got a really, really bad vibe from this guy, and I remember my mom telling my brother and I to go inside, and we did, but we watched out the glass door. Rocky had surprisingly been quiet at that point, but was now next to my mom, and she had her hand around his collar. The guy rolled down his window and asked my mom if she wanted to purchase some meat. My mom said no and to please leave our property. Instead, he went on about the different types of meat, and asking how much we wanted. Beef, venison, pork, etc. My mom asked him to leave again, but instead he decided to get out of the nasty white pickup. As soon as his feet were on the ground, Rocky went ballistic, barking and snarling. This finally made the guy stop. He looked at Rocky, looked at my mom, and then asked, "Does your dog bite?" And my mom, deathly serious, replied, "Only if I tell him to." The guy took one more look at Rocky and I'm guessing decided not to mess with the giant, snarling beast. He got back in his truck, backed up, and headed back down our driveway. I don't know if he really was selling the meat or not, but apparently he had been around to our neighbors as well, who had also gotten a really bad vibe from him. We'll never know what he was really up to with those giant slabs of meat in the bed of his pickup truck. Maybe he was just a weird guy trying to sell some sketchy meat. Maybe he was looking for something else. We never saw the meat man, as we started to call him, again though. To this day, Rocky is still kicking it, by the way. He's almost 15 and now he's completely deaf. But he's still out in the yard on summer days, watching over us. About 2 years ago, I moved into a new apartment. The walls were very thin, and because of the fire safety laws in my city, my bedroom had one window which led into the living room, and none with outside access. The window will be important later. It was 3 bedrooms, one for me, one for the master tenant, and one spare, which at the time was rented out by a pretty friendly guy. Well, the friendly guy had issues with his work visa, and had to move back to Canada last minute, leaving us about 2 weeks to find another roommate. Our quickest and easiest option was Craigslist. Due to my work schedule, I had no part in the selection process, but I was content when the new roommate moved in a little later. He seemed a bit off but friendly. He was a very tall, large guy but pretty quiet, and not someone I wanted to go out of my way to hang out with, but I was okay to be around and be cordial with. About 2 weeks into his move-in, the master tenant left for Hawaii, leaving him and I alone in the home for a month-long duration of his stay. For the first few days, things are pretty normal. All of a sudden, about 4 days into the trip, I am woken up about 8 a.m. to a frantic knocking at my door. My roommate, we'll call him Kyle, is standing there when I open up, looking frazzled. He looked me dead in the eyes and said, "So, do you want to tell me what went on last night?" To which I was shocked and confused because I had come home from work at about 9 p.m. and immediately showered and went to bed. I explained this to him and he tells me that he heard me screaming and arguing with someone in my room, that he saw me in the side alley out the window, arguing with our landlord, whom I had never even seen at that point, that he heard people coming in and out of our house. I tell him no way, none of that ever happened. After staring at me for a little longer, he leaves and he doesn't bring it up again. The next morning, I wake up to the same thing. This time, he says that he saw me arguing with my boyfriend. I was single at the time. Had seen me talking with our other roommate, who's in Hawaii, and asking me for the badge number of the officer that I had spoken to, since he had apparently seen me talking to a bunch of police as well. This time, I get angry and more or less tell him to cut this crap out, because I'm not doing anything and I don't know what he's talking about. He gets a weird look on his face and says, "I think I had a seizure in my sleep. The next time it happens, call an ambulance." And he leaves for a bit, only to start knocking again about an hour later, and when I open up, Kyle repeats the exact same story verbatim. This happens once more before I tell him to leave me the heck alone and leave for work. I go to work as normal and I am reluctant to return that night, but I'm too tired to switch to an alternate location. Big mistake. About 1 a.m., I wake up to slamming doors. Kyle is pacing back and forth between his bedroom, the living room, and out the front door, walking in and out of each room, turning the lights on and off, mumbling angrily and slamming the doors. I can see his figure pacing back and forth through the frosted window in my room that leads to the living room. Since my room is dark, he can't see inside. Suddenly, he screams, "I can't live like this. Why are you doing this to me?" I think he's on the phone and I don't respond. A few moments later, he screams my name repeatedly and I realize that he's directing it towards me. I knew I had to get the heck out of there. So I very quietly creep out of bed and start getting dressed and packing a bag of clothes for work in the morning. I'm almost done when he screams, "I hear you," and charges over to my room, slapping the wall next to my door and not touching the door itself. I look toward my window and I see his shadow lean all the way forward, pressing his ear up against the glass. I was terrified and sat completely still, unmoving. He eventually screams my name again and moves away from the window, and I hear him start pacing between rooms again. Now, my shoes are kept on a rack outside of my door, and not inside of my room, So I know that when I'm going to leave, I'm going to need to take a moment to put them on. I decide to wait until his pacing takes him out the front door again, at which time I plan to grab my shoes, put them on, and run. As I'm formulating this plan, the pacing stops. He screams, "Do you want to fight about this? Come out right now and we'll fight, I swear to God." Now, I'm a very small 5-foot girl and this guy is easily 3 times my size, so I'm definitely not looking for a fight, thanks but no thanks. After a few minutes, he turns off all the lights and I hear the door to his room open and close, followed by silence. I wait for a moment to be sure that I can't hear any movement, and then I decide to take my chance. I took a deep breath and pulled my door open quietly. I step out and grab my shoes before I look up a second later, and I see him standing shirtless with just a pair of boxers and socks on in the dark of the hallway. His arms hung slightly outward in an awkward position. He says in a low, calm voice, "Ma'am, we need to talk." That was a hard no for me, so I grab my shoes and run out the door with them in hand. I run about a half block barefoot before I stop and put them on. When I look back, he's standing in the porch lights of a front door, watching me run but not moving. Luckily, I had a friend who lived 2 blocks away and I had their spare key, so I let myself in and I crashed there for the night. And that's where I stayed for the next week or so while we worked things out with the master tenant, and Kyle agreed to move out within the week. He said that he doesn't remember anything that happened, or wasn't sure if it was real or not. But if I said that's what went down, then it must be real. The day Kyle left, he sent me a photo of the house key sitting on the table and says, "I'm out, nothing else." I take a friend over there with me to scout it out and ensure that he actually left. And when we get there, we discover that not only had he left a ton of food and furniture, but he had ripped all the fire alarms out of the ceilings. He had unscrewed and removed the deadbolt to the front door, and left them lined up neatly on the front table. We then realized that my front door could only lock by using a key from the outside, and that it had been locked when we had arrived, meaning Kyle still had a key. We called a locksmith immediately. Even after changing the locks, I was still terrified to stay there alone afterwards, and never went to sleep at night without barricading the doors with chairs and other furniture. To this day, I still fear for his safety. He was obviously psychologically unstable, but I also wonder what could have happened if I hadn't been as lucky as I was. Over the summer, I took a long solo trip to China. I was staying in the capital, which was super tourist friendly, so I was really comfortable getting about on my own, sightseeing, etc. One day, I was heading somewhere. I can't quite remember where anymore, and I came across this amazing huge park. It had a little river running through it and loads of flowers and trees. It was honestly huge. One little place near the back had actual playground equipment, like monkey bars and seesaws and stuff. In China, most parks had workout equipment too, and there were a bunch of old people working out while their grandkids were playing around. I tried using one piece of equipment as I thought it was confident in what it did and how to use it. I was not. I sat there so confused, and an old woman saw this and sat in the exact same one to my right and started demonstrating how to use it because she couldn't explain it to me in English. It was the cutest thing. The whole park was a very cute and wholesome place, or so I thought. I loved the park so much that I decided to go back just before I left. The rest of the park was very beautiful, but I loved the little playground part, so I headed straight there. The first time I was there, it was quite empty, which I liked, but this time it was very, very crowded. I decided to not hang about as most of the equipment was already taken, so I just walked straight through. As I was walking through, I felt a pair of eyes on me, so naturally, I turned my head in that direction. There was a guy a couple of feet from me just watching me as I was walking out of the park. He looked to be in his early 20s and harmless. Again, I was wrong. I ignored the gaze, turned back around and kept walking. The whole surrounding area was pretty empty due to how enormous this park was. So, there was no one around, but I could hear footsteps behind me. I didn't turn around to check, but instead, I just quickened my pace as I had a bad feeling about being in this deserted area. When I heard hello, which could have only been directed at me, because there was no one else around, I turned around and saw the guy from the park. I was in no mood to try to entertain this guy who was following me, so I turned back around and started walking even faster, and towards where I knew there would be other people. And then I hear him start running. He catches up to me and starts speaking in Chinese. Of course, I can't understand him, and I speak next to no Chinese, so I tell him in English, "I don't understand you." He keeps saying something over and over in which I couldn't understand, so I just started to try and walk away from him. But he grabs my arm really hard to try to keep me there. I looked at him with a facial expression to say, "What the heck are you doing?" And I yank my arm away. I'm practically running away from him now when he grabs my backpack and pulls me back. Just then, a family came into view, and as soon as the people appeared, he let go of me. I ran straight past the family and kept going until I found a bench to sit on to pull myself together. I made sure that there were other people nearby and that he wasn't following me anymore. I then pulled out Google Translate to try to figure out what the phrase he was kept saying to me over and over. I don't think I'll ever forget it or the expression on his face. It turns out that he was telling me, "It's okay," over and over while trying to attack me. I have no idea what would have happened if that family didn't appear, and I'm so glad I didn't find out.